Hi guys, I'm installing bamboo engineered flooring in my house. So this is what essentially it is a layer of bamboo on top, and there are what seems like some plastic layers and other coatings, and it kind of clicks in like vinyl flooring, but it seems to be more there's more resistance, and you have to work a bit harder than vinyl flooring to get this installed because sometimes the pieces can have a little bit of an arch, and I can maybe show here. I don't know if it's noticeable in the camera, but there's a little arch, which makes actually a little difficult to click them together. So this is the third room in my house that I'm installing it, and there are a few things that I learned along the way that I really wish I knew from the start. It would have made my work a lot easier, less stressful, but also much better quality work. So at this point, I thought I might as well share with other people because the instructions for the flooring, I think, were actually not great. There were a lot of the instructions were good, but some of the things I think were just not good instructions and actually made things more difficult and, if not impossible, to install the floor. So I'll just go in the order of how you go about installing the floor. So first thing, obviously, after you do prep, as you can see here, I did a part underlayment so far. I will add another strip of underlayment, but I just move things around a little bit just to show you guys these tips. But I'll add the underlayment later. So obviously, you have to clean up the subfloor and flatten it out and all that stuff. But I'm not going to focus on the prep. I'm going to just talk about the actual installation. So the first thing that I wish the instructions said, or I think that just made my work a lot easier, is a dead blow hammer instead of a mallet. And not only that, but this dead blow hammer specifically has a narrower face, so that further makes the installation a lot easier. I tried two different weights. I tried 14 ounces, and I tried this one 27 ounces. The 27 ounces just made my work a lot easier, and I felt like I didn't have to hit as hard, so that I felt like I was more in control over the hammering. So with a lighter weight, I had to compensate and hit harder. But with this one, a bit heavier weight, I hit more gently, and it just seems. And I feel like I have a lot more control when I hit more gently with this higher weight. I used a mallet for a while. That thing had a wider face. So what the problem with that was, when I put the tapping block here, and I took the mallet and I would tap on a tapping block. The problem is, with a bigger face, it was harder to balance center on the tapping block, as you can see, it's close to the floor. So sometimes the mallet would bounce off the floor. Narrower face, I think, is very important. If you can go as narrow as possible, highly recommend that. And the other thing that I like about the dead blow hammer over a mallet is that, again, it doesn't bounce as much. The impact felt more controlled, and I understand that the physics behind this is that a dead blow hammer works more like it's pushing rather than like pounding and bouncing back. So I think that actually makes it a lot less likely to damage your flooring, because the force is more spread out over very, I don't know, nanoseconds or whatever, because this thing has sand in it. So instead of all the force hitting all of a sudden, it's more like a pushing effect over whatever nanoseconds or whatever microseconds until it bounces back, actually. The next step I have, so kind of going back to prep work. So what I used on some of the subflooring is I put these screws in between some of the subflooring plywood with a washer. So what that does, if you put it, as you can see here, I put here between three pieces actually, and it presses down on all of them and compresses them a bit, so it reduces the squeaking. So I was able to get rid of some of the nails that were squeaking. There's a nail gone here. So I removed some of the nails, and the washer distributes the clamping force. So it's otherwise, if I were to put just the screw, and this plywood is old by the way, so if I were to put the screw alone, that head just sinks deep into the plywood. So the washer makes it actually not sink through and actually press down on the plywood, and just makes it work a lot better. So the screws that I used was from Home Depot. They have 3-letter code AEC, and so those are the washers, AEC from Home Depot, and the screws are these ones, Spax, number 8X, 2 inches, I think. Yeah, that's about a good length. So that's what I used, and so you can see here, I took the nails out because it was squeaking here, so I put them along the edge, and I think this is just really good way to hold the subflooring down and get rid of the squeaking. If you want to get rid of the squeaking, it's up to you. I think if it squeaks a little bit, it's not the end of the world, so I didn't go too crazy. Anyway, so that's what I did to reduce the squeaking. Okay, and this next tip I think is probably the most important one, actually. I'm just going in the order of like how I install things, but I think this one is the most important, so arguably should have been the first thing, and that is, as you guys can see, the floor is like a triangle. So what I was actually doing here is that, well, the instructions said to start with from one end and go install across, and then do second row all the way across, and then third row all the way across. The problem that I ran into, and this drove me nuts, I spent at least a whole day and just completely wasted my time because I couldn't get the floor to stay together. What happened was when I would, let's say, put one row together, start installing the second row, then the floor would start buckling and the pieces would start coming apart. Or if I somehow managed to do the second floor, the third row, if I tried installing it, it would start, on the other end, it would start making the floor buckle, and it was a real pain. So that's where this triangular island way that I put it together, actually. And now, as you guys can see, now it's a lot bigger. But I started with like a small triangle and building it out outwards from the 90-degree corner of the triangle, building it outwards. As you can see, I've come a long way now. But with this, this helped with it reduced the buckling, so I didn't have to worry about the pieces on the other end buckling when I'm working on this side, because it's more of a more rounded shape, I guess, or triangular, so everything is more compact and firm together, and a triangle is a lot less likely to buckle. So with this flooring, it took quite a bit of effort and work to hammer the pieces together, so that would cause the other sides to buckle if I just went in strips all the way across. So this way was just so much easier to put the pieces together. And at this point, now that I created a solid large triangle, now I can do what the instructions told me and go entire strip across, entire strip across, entire strip across all the way. But starting with a triangle makes it so much easier and gets rid of that buckling. So I usually do a triangle build until I reach across to the opposite side of the room. The triangle goes all the way to the opposite side, and then I begin finishing each row completely at that point, because I think at that point it's solid enough to get together. There's no way it will buckle or loosen up. So that I think I wish I knew that in the beginning, because I was so frustrated. And it was so difficult to make the pieces stay together and not buckle on the opposite side that I happened to be working on. So the next tip is, as you can see, I put the pieces together, and it's a floating design. So this one is only for floating design, not anything you nail down or you stick down. For floating design, have a foot or two space from the wall. And the reason is, well, especially in the beginning when you just have a couple rows, when you keep hammering them in, the pieces on the first row can actually come loose or start buckling again a little.
So with having this space, I can hammer them back in. Once I built the triangle out, I went back and hammered them back in, hammered them in just to make sure that they are secure. And then at this point, my next step here would be to put, again, this is a floating floor. So I'm going to next I will do next is to push the floor in. As you can see, I made the cutout here with the furnace vent. So I'm going to push this floating floor in, and then I will, at this point, the triangle is solid. So I'm going to continue just following the actual installation instructions at this point. And it does, the bigger the island gets, obviously the heavier it is to push, but on my underlayment, it slides, so I can push it around a little, but it is getting heavier now. So you might need to put some muscle in it if the island gets too big. So yeah, I think that in the first floor I did not do this. Have a bit of space from the wall, and then the first row kept falling off when I was hammering the other pieces because everything's vibrating and whatnot. And so I had to keep going and using the pull bar to pull them back in, but the pull bar just doesn't work as good as the tapping block with a mallet or a dead blow hammer. So yeah, I highly recommend this with a floating floor. Just leave a foot there or two ideally, and then when you have a good island built out, then secure it, and that just makes things a lot less stressful and pain. The other thing that when this triangle was smaller, the other thing that I did is have my wife stand, like if I have a couple rows and I'm working, let's say on the third or fourth row, I would have her stand behind me to like press down on my shoulders, whatever, to put the weight down and prevent the floating floor from moving, because it was moving in my case. Again, if you have a nailed down floor, I guess that isn't an issue, but if you have a floating floor, then it'll help to hold the thing down so it doesn't move around, buckle, and whatever, and just make things locked a lot more securely. So yeah, she would just stand behind me and just add the weight to hold the existing rows down, and then while I hammered more. But at this point, as you can see, the triangle is large, so I don't need her weight anymore. And then the final thing, what I did is, obviously, as you guys know, you're not supposed to have less than 8 or 6 inches on an end. So what I would do, I cleaned up for now for this video, but when I go back to installation, I would have just a row of flooring sitting wherever, doesn't matter where, and I would put the beginning and end piece roughly what I plan to cut on each side to make sure that the entire row doesn't result in 6 or 8 or less inches on each end, on the final piece especially, because it happened to me that I built out a row and then realized that the final piece was less than 6 inches, and that I'm not supposed to do that according to the instructions. So I just conveniently, just for my convenience, put lay a row out, connect the pieces gently together, and then I would kind of roughly look at the first piece and the final piece for each row and just make sure it's okay. And it just makes it really convenient to have a row just laying casually rather than trying to do the math and whatnot. For me personally, I don't know, maybe someone's so good at math they can just take the entire length and divide by length of the room divided by length of the piece, and maybe someone is so good at math, but I personally prefer that. So these are the tips that I wish I knew when I was installing my first room. Otherwise, everything in the instructions is pretty straightforward, and I think made sense. But like installing first and second and third and fourth row all the way across, I think that instructions saying that just wasn't a good good instructions in this case with this type of flooring. So if you run into these type of issues, with like buckling on opposite side, try these tips, the triangle, and have some assistant, your spouse or whatever, stand along with you and add some weight to hold them together. And I hope that you guys find this helpful. And if you do, please like my video and share with your friends, family, loved ones, your kids, or whoever. But anyway, I'm just doing this because I just think that after doing all this work, I learned these things that I think makes it so much easier with the floor that's not highly cooperative like this one, it requires a bit more effort to install together. So that's all. Take care. Bye.
Okay, so I just want to summarize what I discussed during the video very briefly. So these tips apply mostly to floating floors. I just want to make sure that you didn't try to do some of these things where you nail the floor down, because it just wouldn't apply. So, and I'll talk about them, the tips in a bit different ordering. So the first thing that I want to repeat is to reduce the squeaking. What I did is I removed the nails that squeak. So the way squeaking works is that some of the nails start coming out a bit out of where they were nailed in, and then when you walk on the plywood on top of the floor, the plywood moves up and down a little bit and rubs against those nails and causes very loud squeaking. So what I did is I took those out, and mostly I put the new screws with washers on the perimeter of each plywood sheet. So instead of into the sheet, I think the perimeter is better personally, but you can try different other ways. You can try in the center too. But generally, I did on the perimeter because I think that allows a little bit of movement for the plywood with the seasonal expansions and contractions of wood. So that's what I did. And the specific screws and washers that I used was Spax number 8X, flathead 2 inches, and with washers letter code AEC from Home Depot. So I use these specifically. These flatheads, the top of the flathead would sit just on top of the washer, so they are not like sticking up and then would interfere with installing the floor, because obviously you don't want bumps sticking out of the floor when you're installing you don't want bumps in the subflooring when you're installing the top floor. So these flathead screws, the top of the head the perimeter would just be just slightly larger than the inside perimeter of the washer, which makes them sit just barely on top of the washer and almost flat, so that made them not stick out of the floor. So those are the items that I used from Home Depot. Number two, a dead blow hammer. So again, the narrower the face, the better. And again, the reason was with a traditional mallet that has a wide face, I think they're like 1.5 or 2 inches, whatever they are. I tend to, when I was trying to hammer in the flooring with the tapping block, the mallet would sometimes hit the subfloor, and kind of bounce around, and it was annoying. So with the narrower face on the mallet or hammer, it's easier to just hit the tapping block without hitting the subfloor. So I found it a lot easier and in control with this narrower face dead blow hammer. Plus, the dead blow hammer has sand inside of it, so that just changes the physics. Instead of a sudden impact on the tapping block, it's more kind of like a pushing effect, which I found to work a lot better. And just everything felt like it was working a lot more smooth and securely. So the weight that I used was 27 ounce. I tried two different weights. The 14 ounce weight felt a little bit light. I think that it could have been fine, but I found the 27 ounce, and not because I felt that I needed more force specifically, but because with the higher weight, I didn't have to swing as hard, so I felt that I was in more control, and things were just working out more securely and better because I didn't have to hit as hard. So I just would tap very lightly with this 27 ounce dead blow hammer, and things would just click in. And I tried to go as light as possible as long as the flooring was clicking in. So again, with the smaller swinging of the dead blow hammer, more controlled, I felt that it was just felt a little bit more secure and smooth. You can try a different weight. You can try I think a lot of them come in like 16 ounce. You can try to see what works for you, and then return the one back to the store which doesn't work so well for you. That's what I did. I bought a few different weights, but I like the 27 ounce the most, specifically the Husky one because it had the smallest face compared to some other ones. Next tip that I will repeat is start by building out a triangle rather than a rectangle all the way across from one side of the room to the other. So when I followed the instructions for the flooring and built out the rectangle, when I would try to add like the second or third row, the opposite side, other end of the rectangle, on the opposite side of the room would start buckling from me hitting the tapping in the additional pieces on the opposite side. So when you tap, obviously it vibrates and moves a little bit. So that would cause the flooring to buckle across and disconnect on further away. So that was pretty annoying. So when you build a triangle, a triangle is a lot less likely to buckle compared to a rectangle. After I built, I had like 10 or so rows, then I pushed it into the corner, and I had my wife just hang out sometimes in the beginning and stand on top of the flooring just to hold it down. Again, this is floating floor, so she would add some weight to hold it down. So when I was tapping, it wouldn't move so much, because if it moves a lot when I'm tapping, and then it doesn't help, the floor can just again start buckling, or the force, some of the force is lost so if it moves. So having that extra weight from someone just standing on the flooring behind you, ideally, like if you're crouched on the floor, have them stand behind you to add that weight, and this holds the floating floor down and makes it a lot easier to start, especially in the beginning. Then once you add, I don't know, 10, 20, or 10 rows or whatever, I think that at that point you don't need anyone to add additional weight, because at that point the floor will get heavy on its own. And last tip is to have a row all the way across the room, just casually laying around conveniently, so you can, when you start each additional row, you can align it with, just measure it up against this row that you have sitting in the middle of the room, loosely connected, and make sure that the first piece and the final piece are neither one of them is less than whatever minimum length that the manufacturer specifies. So in my case, it was 6 inches. So I would put the first piece and align whatever length I plan to use for the first piece, and then align the final piece at the other end of this row of pieces, just casually laying, to make sure that the final piece was not less than 6 inches. In my case, I think some manufacturers require a minimum of 8 inches. So that's up to you. You can decide whatever. You can have a minimum of higher than the manufacturer requires. But anyway, so having this like one row of pieces flooring and just sitting there to measure up against, I found it really helpful, rather than trying to do the math for all of these pieces that you're going to lay across. So anyway, thank you for watching, and good luck with your floor installation.